things to consider as we're talking about what might come into St. Louis or moves that we might make. First thing I have on the radar is the in-season MLS primary transfer window is January 31st to April 23rd. MLS recently announced that. This is different than the international transfer window, which is basically the month of January and our ability to bring in players from outside. This mostly relates to trades that can occur between MLS teams per the MLS roster rules. So because it's different, it gives you a little bit more of an eye towards how we might be looking to bring in players. The roster compliance date is still February 23rd, so we have to have a set roster, but we can trade within MLS until April 23rd. Will we do that, though? That brings up a whole myriad of other questions, and it leads directly into the roster flexibility that I think is important to know. So really quick, running through what our roster might look like, how much space do we have to bring in a player to replace Nico Gioacchini, etc. The main roster designations I have to watch for, because MLS has a lot of designations to each player on their roster: senior designated player, young designated player, U22 initiative, and international players. The quick of it is that a senior DP is a player whose combined salary and amortized transfer fee, averaged over the life of the contract, is about $1.68 million per year in 2024, but their salary cap hit for a designated player is the max budget charge, $683,000 for 2024. You're allowed up to 3 of these players. We know St. Louis has 2 currently. A young designated player is a player 23 years or younger whose salary and transfer fee is that of a DP, but whose cap hit is only $150,000. Or if he's if he's between 21 and 23, $200,000. Minuscule compared to everybody else. Massive benefit to a young DP. If you have 2 senior DPs, you can have 1 young designated player. A U22 player is basically just 22 years or under when they've signed their first MLS contract and who make up to that max budget charge. So it lets you pay a player a little more who's a little younger, and their hit to the salary cap mirrors a young DP. It's $150,000 if they're 20 or under, and $200,000 if their age is 21 to 25. As long as they're still on that initial U22 contract, like Chris Durkin is for St. Louis. Clubs are allowed up to 3 U22 players as long as they have 2 or few senior DPs. St. Louis City qualifies for that. And of course, an international player is just a player who doesn't have citizenship, a green card, a passport, or really any other identification to be considered a domestic player in the United States. Clubs can have up to 8 of these as well. St. Louis City currently has 8, and they'll need to trade for an additional slot if they want to sign an international player to replace Nico Gioacchini. Now, what does the St. Louis City roster look like that allows us to use a lot of these? Well, like I mentioned, St. Louis City has 2 senior DPs in Klaus and Leuven, 1 U22 player in Chris Durkin. So their options now are going to be they can sign a senior DP that comes with either a $150,000 fee to the league, or they'd require them to buy down the salary of Edu Leuven, who is eligible based on that salary and transfer fee amortization to be bought down from a designated player. They could also sign a young DP right now with no changes. They could sign a U22 or a traditional senior roster slot player to fill Nico Gioacchini's place on the roster. Gioacchini was on a $400,000 a year salary, so it's not chump change, but it's also about midline when it comes to up to the max. They would need to acquire, like I said, an international slot if they want to sign an international player. But what is St. Louis City likely to do right now going into the season? Well, history's shown that Lutz is not a quick fixer. He's not one to make a move as a stopgap. He said so directly, and his longer-term vision makes me think that he's a lot likely to be scouting a player now, signing a player in the summer transfer window, possibly after some of the contracts come up, and he can acquire a player on a free, which he has shown a penchant to do. If we don't sign a replacement player right now, how likely are we to fill Nico's 2,100 minutes, 10 goals? Where's that production going to come from? Well, I see it coming from the obvious answers. Sam Adeniran playing more, a consistent role for Caden Glover, more time for Knut Thoresen, who was brought in last summer with an eye towards having a large role starting this year as a forward or a second striker on the left, or more time for Rasmus Alm once he is healthy after his surgery to repair his sports hernia as a forward or a second striker on the right. The other option, of course, is that we deviate a little bit from our 4-4-2 that we had liked at the end of 23, and we go back to more of a 4-2-3-1 consistently, which just means that we'll leverage Klaus and Sam as likely forwards who supplement each other. And no matter what, it gives Bradley Carnell and Lutz Pfannenstiel a lot more attackers, more opportunity for the existing group to take their shot and run with it. And while it will be exciting to have a signing before the season, obviously, I'd say that everybody should set their expectations that this is our group that we're running with to start CONCACAF Champions Cup, to start MLS regular season, into the US Open Cup, and that we look to the summer transfer window starting in July as a time to add players, reinforcements that can bolster this team going into the back half of the season. I think our roster set with 28 players under contract right now, if Nico is in fact transferred out, makes for plenty to go the first half of the season, knowing that we expect reinforcements halfway through the season. Look forward to talking about this a whole lot more on Flyover Footy in the coming weeks. Thanks, and I'll talk to you later.